Hello everyone. Good afternoon. I hope I'm audible to all.
Yes.
Okay, great. Nice. So yeah, once again, I welcome you all to this session. I hope you all would know that what's the agenda of the session gonna be for today. So we'll be discussing about promises. So the main agenda is basically to discuss about fetch, how to make API calls. But yeah, it's worth to spend some more time, understanding what promises are and how they are actually used, because it's basically a fundamental thing that you need to understand in order to make fetch calls. So yeah, that's gonna be the agenda for today's session, and I think we can get started. Few more people, I guess, would join it, but okay, I guess yeah, we can start. So I would request Narendra to take over.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I'll share my screen. Are you guys able to see my screen?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So first thing first, I'll create a Okay, so we will talk about the promises today. Promises, all the fetch API and the async await, they are based on the promises. So it's worth like spending some time on promises. So what the promise in JavaScript is basically similar to the promise in real life. So what is promise? So promise is a proxy for some value which someone promise you to give. So it's just a proxy for some value. So let's say you want to have breakfast, oats in the breakfast. So but you don't have oats right now, but so you ask your friend to go to the shop and bring some oats. So he says that he will bring some oats, so he will make a promise that he will bring some oats, and by that time you will boil the water, and once he brings the oats, you will like cook the oats. You will not wait for him to bring the oats and then you will start to boil the water. You will start boiling water, and once he will bring the oats, then you will start cooking that oat. So it's similar to the promise in JavaScript is similar to the promise in the real life. Let's say I have a shop const, and this shop may have the oats or not. So I'll make an object shop, and shop stock, let's say we are calling it. So it may have oats. Let's for now this in the stock it has the oats, and what I am saying that if the shop doesn't have oats, it has and let's assume that it will always have Maggie. So if my friend will not be able to find the oats, it will bring Maggie. So I will start boiling water. If my friend will get the oats, I will cook the oats, otherwise I will cook the Maggie. So you create promise in JavaScript using promise keyword. So let's create a promise. Const. Let's name it my promise. Promise is equal to new promise. you use the promise interface to create the promise, and you use new keyword to create an object. So you are, in some sense, you are creating a promise object. So in the promise object, take a callback function. So I will write the callback function. So inside the callback function, in the parameters of callback function, you pass two arguments. First, when what will you do when the promise resolved, and the second, what will you do when the promise reject. And you need to define what will you return if the promise resolves, and what will you do when the promise gets rejected. So let's say resolve. So in using this statement, what we are saying, that we are creating a promise, that is, we are making a promise that if I will get, I will bring you the oats. Okay, I will bring the oats. So let's now try to print promise, and I will run. So what it prints? It prints that this variable my promise is a promise which resolve with the value bring the oats. So till now what we have done, we have created a promise. This is the syntax for creating a promise. So you start with the new keyword which says that I am creating a new JavaScript object, and promise interface is used to create a promise. So, and the promise takes the callback function as a parameter. So this is the callback function, and this callback function will be passed two arguments, resolve and reject. So resolve will be called when the promise resolves, and reject will be called when the promise rejects. Is there any issue till now? How we create a promise? So I'll assume that you guys understood. So let's make it little bit interesting. So I will resolve this promise if I will get, if the shop stock has the oats. So if dot oats, then I will resolve else I will reject. Okay, let's remove this. So now this, so what we are saying here now, so I am making a promise that if the shop has the Maggie, has the oats, then I will bring oats. Otherwise, I will bring Maggie. Okay, is there any question till now that how we are creating the promise?
Sir, can a promise have two resolves or only one is permittable?
Only one.
So once a resolve is raised, is it like a return function or
Yeah,
can we
it's
have
like
more?
a return function.
So we can't have lines after the resolve, basically.
Yeah, I mean, resolve function will be called.
You can write anything means after the resolve call as well, but once that statement is triggered, any code written after that won't be executed.
It won't be
at all.
like
Yeah.
just like return. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you can think of it like when I will come to that, but this function will be invoked if the promise gets resolved, and this function will be invoked when the promise gets rejected. So these two like functions are important. So now let me for now. So this is the promise which resolves with the bring the oats. And let's say I change this oats to false. To false. This means that the in the shop stock there is no oats. So this resolve. So the promise will not get resolved. It will get rejected. So my friend will bring the Maggie. Okay, let's try to print it. So don't focus on these things. It says that it's unhandled promise rejection. Just focus on this statement. What this statement says, that the promise is rejected with the value will bring Maggie. Okay, so any promise can have three states. The first state is pending, the second state is resolve, and third state is rejected. So in the first case, when the value of oats was true, the state of the promise was resolved, and when the value of oats was false, then the state of promise was rejected. And let's do one thing. Let's put some set timeout here. Okay, set timeout. Set timeout. And so it will take a callback function. And let's say it will run after, it will delay the code for 2 seconds. I'll put everything inside this set timeout function. I'll remove this for now. And now let's try to run this code. Let's clear this. So what it says, promise pending. So these are the three states the promise can have. Okay, in the first case it was resolved, the second case it was rejected, and now it's pending, because when this function was when this was triggered, console.log was triggered, the promise was still in process. It was pending. Okay. So now what I said in the beginning, that promise is just a proxy for some value. So it is in this case it is proxy for two values, like bring the oats and will bring Maggie. And let's make it. So this is proxy for these two values, and so now how I will like fetch these two values. So for that, this object provides you a method .then. I mean then method. my promise dot then. So then we'll take then takes two arguments. It takes basically two callback functions. Handler function, we call them handler function. One handles when the promise gets resolved, and one handle when the handle the call when the promise gets rejected. So let's make two separate functions, and then we will make use of that handler function in this promise.then. Let's call it handler. So what it will take a value and it will just log this value. Console.log. Whatever the value will be passed, it will just log this value. And now let's create the another handler which will handle when the promise gets rejected. Okay. And then I will pass these two functions here. So now what is happening here? So these are two functions which will handle the settled state. Settled state means either it's resolved or it's rejected. And then function provides you a way to run these functions, the resolve handler and reject handler. Okay, and whenever these two functions will be called, these functions will be passed the value which promise provides when it gets resolved, and this one will be passed a value which the promise I mean when the promise gets rejected, it will pass this value. This value will be passed to this function, and this value will be passed to this function. So initially I said that the promise, when the promise is the like proxy for some value, so it is proxy for these two values, and when this function will be called, this function will be passed with the value with which this promise resolved, and this function will be passed that value on which this promise gets rejected. Okay, so let's run this. So initially it's pending, and then it said we'll bring Maggie. So what happened here? So I said initially that this function will be called when the promise gets resolved, and this function will be called when the promise will get rejected. So in this case, the SOP doesn't have the votes, so we know that if the SOP doesn't have votes, then it will get rejected, because it gets resolved in the case when the SOP has the votes. Okay, so this promise will get rejected, so this function will be called with the value will bring the Maggie. So the will bring the Maggie will be passed to this function. So the value of this function will be the value of this val variable will bring the Maggie, so it will log this value. And let's say for now it's saying will bring the Maggie. And now let's change the value of this stock of this oats true. What it says now. So initially it's pending, and after that we'll bring the oats because this promise gets resolved now. Is it clear? Any question? Okay. So I hope you guys understand what is happening there. So once you create the promise, you can get the value of a resolved value or rejected value in this handler. So now, so what this
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah, I thought I was having some problems. Okay, I think Narendra is having some issues. Yeah, let's just wait for a few more minutes. So basically, that clarification means resolve and reject. They basically act, what I say, as a callback functions. That means if you try to write some code even after calling those resolve or reject, that code can still get executed. Just a minute. Yeah, sorry. So Narendra is joining in a bit. Yeah. So what I was saying is that they basically act as a callback functions. That means you can write some code after that, and if that's an asynchronous code, or okay, let us talk about synchronous code. If that is synchronous code, so that would basically be executed before the resolve function is executed. And if you write some asynchronous code, that would still be executed, but just on the matter that it will get executed after the resolve function. That means writing some code even after resolve and reject works. They are just acting as a callback function. Probably we can see a few of the examples in the session going forward.
Hello, sir.
Yeah. Hello, Sachin. Your voice is breaking a bit.
Sir, in the meanwhile, can you explain what a callback actually means?
Sorry.
Sir, can you explain what a actually?
I'm not able to understand basically. Your voice is breaking a lot.
Sir, I'm asking that what is the
Uh,
Okay. You can write it in the chat.
yeah, probably you can write it in the chat. Your voice is breaking a lot. Not
I
able to
think,
understand.
sir, he's asking for callbacks, if I'm not wrong.
Okay, what he's asking about callbacks? What's the question means?
I think so. He wants to know what the callback functions actually mean.
A
function-
callback is
Yeah. Okay.
a callback is something that you basically pass as a function inside a function.
As an argument, as a function in
Yeah.
the function.
As an argument. Yeah.
So for example, here the promise is a kind of function, and in this function you are passing this function. So we are calling this function a callback function. So this part is also a function. This part, yeah, I don't know where it gets ended, but this function is this is also a function. So and this is the argument for the promise function. So this is a callback function. So now I was here that what we are talking about, that the promise, when you call this then function, then it also returns a promise. So what I will do, I will store this inside another function and then try to print what, try to like log what is this. So my promise is the original promise which we make in the beginning, and dot then we are handling this promise for resolve or reject, and the resolve handler handles the rejection and resolve case, and reject handler handles the rejected case. And now this statement will also return a promise. So now let's try to print what it is. My promise to then and inside this I will just log this my promise. So let's try to run this code. So this the code inside this my promise to dot then returns a promise which resolves with undefined. This code prints the promise which resolves with the undefined. Is there any confusion here? So my promise dot then also returns a promise which resolves with the undefined. So now let's do one thing. The resolve handler, so instead of logging this value, let's return this value. And now try to run what is happening now. What happens? Let's clear first. So now it resolves with will bring the votes. What happened? What changed? Are you guys able to understand what I'm saying? If you are confused, then tell me, because these are the basics which we are going to use in async, await, and fetch, because both are based on this promise.
Sir, so basically, my promise to dot then will return the promise of the return value of the either the resolve handler or the reject handler. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean it will return my promise dot then will return a promise which resolve with the return. If this promise is getting resolved, then it will resolve with the value which the resolve handler returns. So in case if we don't have return statement here, so resolve handler will return undefined. So that's why in that case, this the value of my promise 2 was being resolved with the undefined. Also, one more thing. So for now, it if I'll run this code, then it will the my promise 2 will be a promise which resolves with the value with this value, and this value and what is this value? This value is the will bring the votes, because the votes is true. So the control goes like this. So initially initially if you see the initial promise, it will if the votes the property value of votes is true, then it will return, in some sense, will bring the votes. So, and when the my promise dot then, if will call the then method on my promise, because this promise is being resolved, it will call this handler. So and with the value which on with which this promise is being resolved, and that will bring the votes. So the value of this val will bring the votes, and then it is returning this value. So the next promise in the chain will be resolved with this value. So let's do one thing. I'll do, let's remove this and write 1 here and write 0 here. Okay, and let's return well plus 1 and see what happens. So now this promise resolve with 2. Because the what this resolve handler is like returning value plus 1. So whatever it is getting, it is just increasing by 1 and then returning. So this new promise will be resolved with the value plus 1. So let's say I will so is this clear now? Huh?
Yes.
Right. Okay. So what will happen if I will put dot then here, dot then, and then value. What do you guys expect? What will this be? I mean, what will be logged for this statement? Any idea? Let's remove this one. Maybe this is confusing you guys. And for now, let's remove this resolve handler and all these things. I'll just write the callback function here. I'm insisting too much on it because it's very important to understand. In order to understand fetch and all those things, how this promise chain works. So for now, let's forget about these things. So you have a promise, and if you will pass only one parameter, if you will pass only one callback function to the my promise, then it will be called only when the function gets resolved. So my promise is the initial promise, and then inside the dot then method, you have a callback function, this one. So it will be triggered with the resolved value when the function gets resolved. It will not be triggered when the function gets rejected. I mean, the promise gets rejected. And then this will also return a promise. So this means that you can also on this dot then, you can also call dot then method, and then dot then will, so this is the new promise, and in this on this promise you are calling new method dot then, and the value of this val will be the value with which this promise gets resolved. So it will log that. And then again, this is also a new promise which will be resolved with whatever this dot then returns. I mean, this callback, whatever this callback function returns, and then that value will be passed to this, the value of this val parameter, and then it will again be logged on the console. So this is the first promise, and this part is the second promise, and this part is the third promise, and this part is the fourth promise. So let me run this code. So the first time it says 1, and after that it says undefined, undefined. Can someone explain why it's saying so? Am I audible?
Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yes, sir.
So what's the problem? That's what I am asking.
Sir, for the next two promises, we don't have the resolve method which is returning anything.
Yeah, I mean, this method, this is the promise, and the value of this val will be the value with which this promise resolved. So for this we have this resolves with 1. So this statement doesn't have any issue. Console.log will log the value of this val, which is 1. But this the new promise, this one is not returning anything, it's returning undefined. So the value of this val is undefined. So now if I'll return val plus 1, now the value of this val will be whatever the value, whatever the previous value and plus 1. So the value of this val is 1. So this the new promise, this one will resolve with 2. So the value of this val will be 2. Now let's try to run this code. So 1 and 2, but this is still undefined. Why? Why the third promise?
Sir, we need to return in the second promise also.
Yes.
Sir, can we use resolve statement here, or we need to use return only?
No, you need to use return here, because in order to pass the resolve, you will have to pass somewhere. I mean, if you look at the concept of this callback function, you first pass two values, resolve two functions actually, resolve and reject, which will be triggered when the function will get resolved or rejected. I mean, the promise will get resolved or rejected. So, and we are not passing anything like this here, and we are just passing the value which this promise, the value, the resolved value of this promise.
So, sir, return always means resolved.
Yeah, return always means resolve. This return statement says that the next promise, the new promise will be resolved with the value with which this statement resolve. I mean, this statement returns. So let's say I will print 7 here. Return 7. So this promise will be resolved with the 7, with 7. So this statement will print 7. Yeah, 7. See? So whatever you will return, the next promise will resolve with that value. I mean, this parameter only, I mean, this is the value of the previous resolved promise. Is this clear now? Is it clear? I don't know.
Yeah, yes, Narendra, I guess you can probably move forward.
Okay. So now, but what happens if the first promise gets rejected? The first promise will get, if the first, what I said, that if the dot then has only one callback function, then it will be triggered only when the promise gets resolved. So we are not handling anything. We are not handling like the rejection case. So let's check what happens here. If I run this, yeah, unhandled promise rejection. This says that my promise gets rejected, but I mean, there is no callback function to handle the rejection. So it goes to the second one, and this also doesn't have anything to any callback function to handle that rejection, and it gets to the third one, and it also, and there also it doesn't find any callback function to handle that rejection. So what we can do, catch, if we'll use the catch function, catch we use to handle the rejection of the promise. So there is two way you can handle the rejection. Either you pass to callback function in dot then, so the second callback function will be triggered when the promise gets rejected, or you can use dot catch. See, it's printing 0. So what happened here? It on my promise, dot then has only one callback function, so it doesn't find any handler for this rejection. So it goes to the second then, it doesn't find any handler which can reject that, which can handle that rejection, and goes to the third one. There also it doesn't find any handler to handle that rejection. So it, and then he finds catch. So the value with which that promise gets rejected is passed to this well parameter, and then it's being logged to the console. Is it clear now? Okay, I'll assume that it's clear. So what happens if I don't write catch here, and I try to catch this in, I mean, I don't want to catch this error at the end. I want to catch this error in between, like in the channel. Let's say I want to catch this here, not here. So what do you think what will happen? Well, uh, this then will be triggered or not? You saw in the last case that none of these then were called. And let's run this first. Yeah, these two values are being called. I mean, this is saying undefined because undefined plus 1 is not a number. That's why this one is saying NaN. So what happened here? Can anyone explain? I mean, try to explain, otherwise you will not be able to understand. This is slightly complex topic.
Sir, we need to return something in the catch also.
Okay, let's return. Return, let's say I'll return 8. Okay, and do one thing. Okay, let's run this first. Now it's working. But one thing you can see that even though this promise gets rejected, after this, I mean, if you see in this chain, there are 4 consoles. console.log, right? So if I'm running this file, then it should print 7 values, 4 values on the console, but it is printing only 3. Why? It is printing 0 for this one, this console.log, and for this console.log, this catch is returning 8, so it is printing 8, and for this console.log, this then is returning 8 plus 1 9, so this is printing 9. But this console.log is not being triggered. Why? You are not properly audible. Maybe there's some internet connection there.
Sir, because the promise was rejected.
Yeah, the promise was rejected, so this one will not be called, because if the dot then has only one callback function, so it will be triggered only when the promise get rejected. I mean resolved. So this one will not be triggered. So, but then in the chain it finds catch. So catch will handle that error. Okay. But what happened here? I mean, it is returning 8 and it is a rejection. So in some, you can think of this then should not be triggered because my promise was rejected. This then has only one callback function, so it should be triggered only when the promise is resolved. But this is being triggered. Why? Because if you return something from the catch, it will return a promise which will resolve with that value. So this is new promise. From here to here, this is new promise, and this promise is being resolved with the 8. It's not being rejected, because return statement will say that this is the new promise, and this new promise will be resolved with the value whatever this catch statement is returning. So then will be triggered, because this promise, this promise is being resolved with 8, so then will be triggered. So, but ideally this should not be case. If my main promise is being rejected, so it should remain rejected till the end. Like if I'll let me do one thing. And when this catch will be called?
When the third promise is rejected.
Yeah, when this promise is rejected. This promise is rejected. This promise is rejected, or some promise is rejected in between. But here what is happening, my promise is being rejected with some value, so this is not being triggered, but the catch will handle that rejection and it returns 8, so it resolves the promise. So after that, this new promise is now resolved. Now new promise will be resolved, will get resolved with the value 8. So it will not search for any catch. It will find then, and So it will do whatever the callback function of dot then is doing. So, but ideally this should not be case. If some promise gets rejected, it should be always handled by the catch. So how will we do it? Because we cannot use return, because then the new promise will get resolved with that value. So what we can do, let me first run this code so that I could show you that this console.value. I just want to show that this catch is the callback function of this catch is not being triggered. Yeah, you can see there is no statement like this is final catch or something. This is final catch. So this catch is not being triggered. I mean, the callback function of this catch is not being triggered. So instead of returning, let's throw an error here. Throw error. Let's say anything. So now, and let's run this code. Yeah, you can see that it's printing after 0, it is printing final catch. It's not this then are not being called now. So inside the catch, if you are using catch in between in the chain, if you are using catch in between the chain, then you should always throw an error. Because if you will return something, the next promise will get resolved with that value, which ideally should not be the case. So you should always throw an error inside the catch if you are using catch in between the chain. Okay. Is there any question till now?
If we throw an error, then what is the use of first catch?
First catch. I mean,
Yeah.
we are printing the value of whatever. I mean, the value with which this catch gets rejected. I mean, this promise gets rejected. So till now, you can say that this is the promise, and this is the second promise, and this gets rejected. So this promise gets rejected. So this will not be triggered. So the catch will be triggered. But I want this error to pass down to pass. I want this error to pass down to the chain. I mean, you can do whatever you want to do here inside this, and at the end, you just throw an error so that this, I mean, this rejection doesn't get resolved. Otherwise, if you'll return something, or even if you will not return anything, it will resolve with the undefined. And this dot then you are when you are writing dot then you are assuming that it will be triggered when the promise gets resolved. So if even if this promise gets rejected, this then will be triggered, because this catch make a mistake and it returns something.
Okay, got it.
Okay, I hope it's clear now. Okay, so should we move forward? Is there because this is the fundamental thing you need to know in order to understand those how this fetch and async await are working. So this is very important to understand. So if you guys have any issue, then you can ask here. So I will assume that everybody has understood. And one more thing I wanted to discuss. I mean, I'll discuss it later. Okay. So now let's make new file async await.
Narendra, can you take that example as well? Means if we write a set of code after calling the resolve or reject function, how does that behave?
Okay, okay.
Maybe you can shorten that long chain of tens and just keep one of them only.
Okay, I'll remove that. Hello. So I guess this will be triggered asynchronously and this will be triggered synchronously then. Let's remove that. Rejection is there, so I'll just change the value to true. Yeah, it prints hello, and after that it prints 1.
Yeah, so since console.log, this will be executed synchronously. That's why it's executed before this resolve call.
Yeah. So
if you try to write something, let's say set timeout, it will be executed after the resolve call.
So once the control goes to the resolve, it just gets out of this main stack. And then it first prints the hello, and then this will be handled using then.
Okay, yeah, there was one more thing that we were doing right from the beginning of this session. Since Narendra mentioned in the beginning that promises are basically really helpful for asynchronous programming. So you can see that the statement written at line number, Narendra, can you scroll down?
9.
No, just scroll down. Okay. Yeah, the statement written at line number 31. This was executing, or you can say the output of this was getting shown on the console for the very first time.
Yeah.
Which means this statement was executed first, and after that, all other things were getting executed. Because using this then basically makes this behavior asynchronous, and this console.log works in a synchronous way.
Yeah, my promise, my promise is just a variable here. So it's printing the value of my promise. So what is it? And dot then is how you handle this promise. So we'll start with the async await now. So async await, let's first make a function const async function. Function and return 1. And now let's call this function. So let's check what this, when we are calling this function, what does this return? What was the name? Async await. Okay. Need to console. Yeah. So what you can see that whenever you will call a async function, it will return a promise. That's why promises were important. So now if you'll use then here, and let console.log, then it will print 1. So this console.log, I am taking it as a callback function. Callback function. So as I discussed earlier, that if you'll use then whatever the callback function you will pass here, it will pass the value with which this promise gets resolved. So to the console.log, 1 will be passed because my async is a promise which resolved with the 1. So 1 will be passed to the console.log. So it should print 1. Okay, double console.log 1. So now you can understand the async function also creates a promise. Okay, now let's try to do more things in the async function. So the basic use of async function is to make use of await keyword. What await keyword does, it waits for the promise to get resolved. So inside this async function, if you will use await keyword, it will, okay, let me write something. Okay, before that, I just want to show one thing. There is a simple way to create a promise. If you want to create a simple promise, then you can use promise.resolve function or promise.reject function to create a promise. Promise 1, promise dot resolve with 1. So this statement also creates a promise which resolves with 1. Okay, let me. It's a simple way to create a promise. So you just pass whatever you want to pass here, and it will create a promise which will be resolved with that value. So now you can see that this is a promise. So this pro1 is a promise which resolves with 1. So I just wanted to show this because I am going to use this inside async function because I don't want to write that amount of code. So let me do one thing. So what I'll do, const x is equal to await and promise dot resolve with 1. So what is happening here? So it will wait for this promise to get resolved, and whatever this promise is returning, if returning means whatever the value, whatever the resolved value, it will store it in X. So you need to like take care of one thing. The await function, the whatever the promise you will pass here, the value of X will be whatever the value whatever the resolved value of this promise is, it will be stored in X. Rejected value will not be stored in X. We will discuss how we can handle the rejected value, but for now you just keep in mind that the value of X will be the resolved value of this promise. Okay, so now let's console.log X, and let's try to run this code. So you can see that it is printing X, printing 1. So it is because this promise will be resolved with the value 1. So 1 will be stored in X. So if you log this value of X, it will print 1. So now let's, instead of promise.resolve, let's say I will use promise.reject1. So what I said, that X is the value with which this promise get resolved, not rejected. If it's rejected, it will throw an error. So let's try to check this fact. So what it's saying, unhandled promise rejection warning 1. The value of X is not being printed. So how, and one thing we know, that the my async is a promise. My async is a promise. So we can use .catch to handle the handle the rejection. So if I will use catch, let's me console.log. So whatever with whatever value this promise, the my async is again a promise, whatever with whatever value my async promise is being rejected, it will be passed to the console.log. So because we are using catch, and catch only gets triggered when the promise gets rejected. So if we, let's say so now if I'll run this code, let me clear this. So when I am now if I am running this code, it is printing 1 because of this catch. Is it clear now? Is there any doubt? I mean, you guys can say yes or no.
No.
Okay. So what I said, that this let me do one more thing. Let's log something here. Console.log statement 1, and here and let's copy and paste. And let's use resolve here. Resolve here. So what do you think? What will be a statement 1, 2, 3? So what do you think? I mean, in which order the statements will be logged? Let's do one more log here. Three and here's the 4. So the function, this is the function definition. So you need to trigger this function in order to execute whatever inside this function definition. So what I'm doing here, I am calling this function my async. So the control will go inside this function, and until this the function state, I mean whatever the definition is, until it gets encounter, I mean it encounters the await keyword, it will run synchronously. Like it will first print statement 2 and then will print statement 3, and as soon as it encounters the await keyword, this is, I mean whatever the promise here, whatever the statement is here, it will be run asynchronously. So the control automatically goes here and it will start printing whatever the statements are here. Let's make it 10 and let's try to run it first. So you can see that the first statement is statement 2, and then second is 3, and then 1, then 10, and then 4, and then 1. So the first line of execution will be my async, and dot catch will only be triggered if the my async returns, I mean if the my async like gets rejected. My async is basically a promise. So if this promise gets rejected, then it will be, the dot catch will be triggered, otherwise it will not be triggered. So the my async, so the control goes inside the my async, and until it encounters the await, it will behave like a synchronous function. So it will print console statement 2, then it will print statement 3, and as soon as it encounters the await, the control goes to the because this statement will be run asynchronously, the control goes to the line number 12, so it prints 1, and then it will print 10, and then after that the control goes to this statement, which is statement 4, and then the value of x is actually 1, because what this statement does, it will store the value with which this promise gets resolved. So this promise gets resolved with 1, so the value of x is equal to 1, so 1 will be printed. So you can see this is the order in which these statements are being printed. Is it fine now?
Yes.
So what happens if I'll reject this? So we know that if the x will not store the value if the promise gets rejected, because it stores only the value when the promise gets if the promise gets resolved. So in this case, it's being rejected. So the control goes to the catch statement here. So whatever the rejected value is, it will be passed to the console.log. So it will log that value. But then after that, these two statements will not get executed. because control will not go back to that place again. So let me run this. You see the statement 2, 3, statement 1, 10, and after that 1, and the 1 is from this catch statement. It's not from here. I mean, let me do one thing. Promise rejected. So I just wanted to show that this, I mean, this is not the, I mean, 1 does not belong to this statement. 1 belongs to this statement. So if the 1 belongs to this statement, then 1 will change to promise rejected. But I'll again run this code. So you can see it again prints 1. That is because this promise is being rejected, it will immediately throw an error, and that the rejected value will be passed to the catch, to the callback function of catch, and callback function of catch is console.log. So basically the statement will be the statement which will run console.log 1. So when you are like using this async function, you need to like take care of these things. So I mean, now let's make some. So what happens if I will, instead of using promise.reject or promise.resolve, let me create a new promise which wait for some time, like which use the set timeout. New promise, and then this promise will have two things. I mean, you can change the name of the resolve and reject. You can write Ram and Sam here. It's not an issue. It's just a name. So, but whatever you are writing here, whatever the names you are writing here, that function will be triggered when the promise gets rejected or resolved. So inside that, let's make a set timeout function, and set timeout function, inside that set timeout function, I will pass a callback function, and in that callback function I will use the resolve, and this promise will be resolved with the value promise resolved. Okay, and then I will call this after 2 seconds. So now what I'm doing here, I'm creating a new promise which will be resolved with the value promise resolved, and at the same time I'm using set timeout to delay this things to happen for 2 seconds. So I mean, this is the similar kind of thing, but it will wait for 2 seconds. I just wanted to write this, wanted to make this promise like this because I wanted you to show that these two statements will only be executed after this promise gets resolved. So I'll run this statement. Now see 2, 3, 1 is printed, and 2 after 10 it waits, and then run statement 4, and then run promise rejected. A promise rejected is for here. If I'll use the X here, it will print the promise resolved. So whenever the control comes here, now this statement is now asynchronous, and it will wait till this promise is resolved or rejected. The control will not go after this line. I mean, this line will not be executed until this is settled. If it's rejected, it will directly go to the catch and it will not come back here. If it's resolved, then once this is resolved, the control will go to the 9 and 10, but it will not get executed. And even if this is asynchronous code, this line will not get executed until this statement finish. That's what this await keyword says. So wait till this promise resolved. Is it clear? I'll assume it's clear. So now what happens after this statement? I will write one new promise. So promise to resolve, I will pass promise to resolve, and then I'll change the name of X to Y. Statement 7, print Y, promise to resolve. So what do you expect? What will happen? Anybody? I mean, it's not a very difficult question to answer.
So we will get promise to resolve and statement 7 also.
Yeah, but I mean, what will be the flow of the program? So the first, I mean, let's start when the control goes here. And when will these two statement will be printed on the console? After which statement? Statement 1 and the statement 10. Will it be printed after console.log x or console.log y, or after statement 3? When?
Sir, after the console.log y.
After this statement, these two will be printed.
Sir, I assume that this could be the case.
Why? I mean, as soon as this my async, the line number 22 start, I mean, this line number 22 triggers this my async function, and then whatever the statements are inside this function, they start getting executed synchronously first. So this will be printed, and then it encounters an await keyword. So now whatever this statement is, it will be run asynchronously. So the control again goes to, I mean, so it will not wait these things to, I mean, the control will go here then, because these are like running, this will be running asynchronously. And whatever the statement comes after this statement will be executed only when this statement is like is settled. The control will not go here until this statement is settled. I mean, this promise is settled. So after this, it will encounter await. So the control will go here. So it will print statement 1, statement 10, and then this promise, after 2 seconds, this promise resolved. So now the control can go to the line number 9. So this statement will be printed, then X will be printed, and then again it like encounters await. So this promise will be run asynchronously. So the again control will come here, but there is nothing to run. So it will wait for this promise to be settled. So after 2 seconds, this promise will get settled. And after that, the console 7 and log y will be printed. Let me. So after. So you see 2, 3, 1, 10. So the first statement will be 2, 3, and then it encounters the await. So it goes to the statement 1 and 10, 2, 3, 2, 3, 1, 10, and then it goes to the 4 and then 7, 4, and then the promise resolved, and then statement 7, and then promise to resolved. Are you guys able to follow how this async function, the control inside the async function is like working? The only catch is when the await function, the await keyword comes inside the async function. If there is no await function, it will act like a synchronous function. It only works asynchronously when it encounters the await statement. And after that, it actually starts working synchronously. Once this promise gets settled, it starts working synchronously. So whatever the statements are after this one, it will be printed, and then again if it encounters await, then again it will like acts asynchronously. I hope it is clear now. Is there any question?
No, sir.
So I mean, let me do one thing. Let me copy this code and paste it here and remove this. Now, can someone explain what will happen now?
Sir, 2, 3, 1, 10, then 4, 7.
4 and X and Y will also, but okay, let me do first one thing before doing that. Yeah, this was previously it was like this. I mean, what will be, I mean, at which time this statement 4 will get executed? Let's say the statement 3 executed at time 0. So at which time this statement 4, let's say the statement 10 executes at time 0. So what will be the time at which the statement 4 will be executed?
Sir, 2.
2 seconds. And what will be the time at which the statement 7
4.
gets executed? 4. Okay, and if I'll cut this and paste it here, remove this. So now statement 4, what will be the time at which statement 4 or statement X will be triggered?
4.
For why?
So because there are 2 timeouts, so it will get added.
Yeah, the state once the statement the control comes here, then it will go here, and after 2 seconds it will come to this statement, and again it will find a await keyword. So it starts executing this set timeout, and it will take 2 more seconds. Then after that it will start printing the statement 4, statement 7. So let me run this. Let me do one thing. T is equal to and data now minus T. So I'm just printing how much time it will take from this statement to this statement. So after 10 it stops. So it takes 4003. It's like 4000 milliseconds approximate. So it will take 4 seconds. So I hope you guys have understood how this async function works. Okay, so should we move to the fetch? So before we start using fetch, I will be using the API which we created in Mad1, the week 6 API, the gradebook API. So let me try to access first localhost 5000 API 4. Yeah. So this is the API for this endpoint. It returns the course ID and course name, course code, and course description, this kind of thing. Okay, so we will use this API to understand how this fetch works. Okay. So I'll create new fetch.js. But one thing to note that the fetch is not available in Node. So I will be creating one more file, that is index.html. HTML, because I need the window object. Okay. So inside this index.html, I will create a template and I will just attach this script fetch.js. So I will be running it in the inside the browser. Okay, I will run in Chrome. Localhost 5500. And I will use the console of this browser. So I will be using the fetch file. So this one. So I'll start with the fetch statement. So let's start with the const. Let's call it response. Response is equal to fetch fetch and HTTP localhost 5000 API plus process
Mhm.
plus 4. And now let's log this. So, and try to understand what is it. So now you see, are you guys able to see the screen clearly?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you can see the fetch call returns a promise. So if I'll, and this so, and so if it is a promise, it will be resolved with something or rejected with something. So this fetch call resolves with the response object. With the response object, what do I mean by this? So let's say I'll try to response dot then, and whatever. So the date, if you will see what we discussed in the beginning, that dot then, the callback function inside the dot then will 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 be passed the value with which the promise resolves. So if this promise resolves, let's call it response. Fine. Console.log. Yes. Close this. So you can see that this fetch is a promise which resolves with a response object. So what I have done here, so whatever the value, so what this the callback function of dot then takes, and what will be the value of this parameter with which this promise, the fetch is the fetch call is a promise, fetch call returns a promise. So whatever the value, the resolved value of this promise will be passed to this parameter res. I mean, it's similar to how whatever we discussed in the promise. There's nothing new here. So you can see why I have logged this value, because I wanted to show that this fetch returns a promise which resolves with a response object. So this is the object with which this promise resolves, the fetch, whatever the promise this fetch returns. So it returns. So I mean, let me print status. So this response object, whatever this response object is, it is not the just body of the response. It's the whole. It is like the whole representation of the response. Okay, and this then will again like return a promise. If you guys like remember that the dot then chain. So let me return this response. So whatever, let me do one thing. So whatever this response is, I will return the response dot JSON. So what this return dot JSON is, return dot JSON converts the response body to the JavaScript object. So for now, the response body, as I showed in the beginning, the response body is a JSON object. is a JSON string. So it will convert that JSON into a JavaScript object. I don't know where it went. Okay, here it is. So what is happening here? This is again returning a promise. So this promise can again be again. So whatever with whatever the value, this promise will be resolved, like response.json. It will the resolved value will be passed to the passed to the next call to the next callback function, like the callback function of the next then in the chain. I mean, I have spent a lot of time on this chain. So whatever this is, the return statement is, it will be passed as passed to this dot then. So let me so now you can see this is the data. Is there any question?
No, sir.
Okay. So you can do all these things using the async await also. I'll actually remove. No. I'll just remove this and I will use the fetch. I mean async await to function. Fetch call. And inside that, I will make a fetch request. So fetch request is fetch request result returns a promise. So we can use the await function because we are using the async keyword. So we can use the await keyword here. Response is equal to await, and then I will use fetch here. So what will happen? It will wait till this promise get resolved. So as we discussed earlier, if this promise doesn't get resolved, it gets rejected. The function will throw an error. It will only stores the value, the resolved value of this promise, which the fetch returns. Okay. So I know what is the value of response. It is the resolved value of this promise. So I can, and which is a response object. So let's not make this name that big. And let's call this fetch call, and then I will try to catch with the network error. So one thing to note here is the fetch only throws an error. I mean, the fetch only gets rejected. The promise which returns will only get rejected when there is a network issue. I mean, even if there is a 500 error from the server, it will still be resolved. It will only gets rejected when this fetch fails, not the server fails. Okay, even if let's say I'll make it 40. So I know that there is no course with the ID 40. Okay, let's make it here. ID 40, but this fetch doesn't fail. This fetch will will be resolved. The promise which fetch returns will be resolved, will also be resolved. Will be resolved. So this catch will not be called. This catch will only be called when there is a failure in fetch, not in the server. So for the 40, it will the server will throw 404, but that is the failure of the server, not the fetch. So this promise will get resolved. So now what I will do, so I'll check if the response dot okay. What response dot okay does, it will check whether and it will response dot okay will return true if the status code is between 200 and 300. Okay. Console.log dot status. Let me print it again. So you see, this fetch returns a promise, and whatever value that promise resolves, it will be stored in res variable, and that is a response object, and response object dot okay returns whether the status code of response was between 200 to 300. If it is between 200 to 300, this statement will be executed. If it's not, then this statement will be executed. So it's 404. So this statement is being executed. Let me change the so it will say response failed. So now what I will do, I will remove all this. If it's okay, status, and if it's okay, then what will you do? What will I do? I'll just change the JSON object to the JavaScript object, and then we'll print it. Const data is equal to await const dot JSON. Response.json. So what it will do, response.json, as we discussed earlier, it also returns a promise, and which resolves with the data with the JavaScript object, which is the JavaScript representation of that JSON object which the server returns. So what it will do, it will what I will log this console.log data. Okay, let me change it to 4. So if we'll change it to 4, it will, this console.log data will print the whole JavaScript object. And if it will, you will change it to 40, then this will not be triggered, and this will be triggered, so it will just print 404. Is there any question? Because these are the things that we have already discussed. What is the async function, how this async function works. And the only new thing here was like fetch returns the promise, which resolves with the response object, and response object is representation of whole response. It's not the representation of only body of the response. So, and that response object has different properties, like response dot status will give you the status code, which the response status code of the response, and response dot OK is another property which returns true if the response code is between 200 and 300. And also one more thing, if you want to change the JSON, the returned JSON into the JavaScript object, you use the .json method, and which will return a promise. So that promise, so here we are using that response.json, and we are logging that data. So is there any question? Because it's 4:31 now.
I just have one question. Can you change that 40 to 4, and then what will happen on the console? I just want to see.
Yeah, it will log this data.
Okay, because say thing is that I am I am using a same async function here, except that I'm not calling a localhost. I'm calling the API.github one.
Okay.
But there it's when I'm calling the fetch.call .catch network, it's returning a promise and not printing it out in the console, like what's happening in your terminal. I don't know why exactly that's happening.
Can you tell me on which line you are talking about? Which one
Means
is promise?
I am implementing a same async function as yours, without the if and else, just the just this part console.log that rust.json.
Okay. So
That portion.
Okay, 1 second. So are you doing like this, like console.log, and are you doing this?
Yes.
Yeah, so this will return a promise.
Okay.
Yeah, as I said, that's why I am using await here.
Okay.
So the rest.json will return a promise which will resolve with the JavaScript object, which is like a JavaScript representation of that JSON string which the server is returning. So you need to like use await in order to fetch whatever the with whatever value this promise resolves. Like here, if you see.
Yeah, now it's working. Yeah, thank you.
So the data will store the value with which this respond.json like resolves.
Okay, thank you. It's working now with that await keyword.
Okay. So is there any question? I hope it's clear now.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So is there any question you want to ask?
No, sir.
Okay. So should we close the call then?
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Okay, so I guess, yeah, just one thing. I think many of you would have already know that, but we have started a course wiki, right, where we have been adding some basic materials related to this application development course. It's probably contains contents for the app dev 1 course, so something related to HTML, CSS, and Jinja 2 templating and all. So I'm not sure, means the GitLab repositories links that we put up on the discourse and course portal for week 3 and for week 5 code base. The same group is being used to host that GitLab repository. So we are basically okay. So we have basically created a course wiki, and that we have hosted on GitLab. If means you would have gone through that group, maybe you would have seen that there is one project there with name course wiki. So if any one of you wants to contribute or uh, you know, since you want to add some material, you think you are really good at something, so yes, you can clone that project. You can make make some changes there, and then you can send us a PR. We'll review that request, and then means we'll merge that if that seems okay to us. And yeah, means that will be live on that course wiki website that we have created for application development learning resources. So I'll also create a thread in discourse stating the same, what are all the steps that are needed in order to clone that project. However, there's a README file in that project itself, so that will give you enough things to understand how you can basically fork that project or clone that project and can send a PR. Yeah, so I'll just create one thread in the discourse as well.
Hello, sir. Can I just ask a question on that itself? I'm
Yeah.
not familiar with the GitLab, but can we clone this in to our GitHub account?
Yeah. So we are in the process of GitHub. That would be done shortly. I guess it would take about a week, and yeah, we'll shift it to GitHub maybe very soon.
No, I'm just asking. Can it be cloned right now to GitHub, or will it be right now be only clonable in GitLab only? That's kind of what I'm asking.
Only GitLab right now.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so we are basically using MKDocs there. I'm not sure how many of you already know about MKDocs. So we have been using MKDocs in order to create the material. So that basically uses simple Markdown. So if anyone of you knows Markdown, you can easily understand how does that work. Yeah, you can probably contribute whatever you are good at. So is there any question for that?
Actually, I have one question, but it's not regarding this course specifically, but all the diploma courses in general. So can I ask that?
Yeah, please.
So the question is that you communicated to us recently that there's a change in the bonus marks scheme, right? So there'll be 15 bonus marks in total, and five will be assigned. If you'll get 5 marks if you attend 25% of the class and so on, right? So is that valid in all courses, or what is the process for that?
Well, to be very honest, I'm not completely sure about this bonus marking. Basically, a different team is handling all of such stuff. So it's better maybe if you could, create a thread in the discourse tagging the operational team, so they may be able to help you better. I'm not entirely sure about this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, is there any other question anyone has? Okay, so in that case, I guess we can close the today's session. Yeah, we'll be having one more live session tomorrow for the quiz 1 revision at 11. So we'll see you all there tomorrow morning. Yeah, so till then, bye bye. Have a good day.
Thank you, sir.